What's up, wizards? This is Planewalker here, and in this video I'm going to explain to you what you need to do in order to have a successful tour. Okay, so the first thing that's really critical to understand about having a successful tour is that the real crux of the matter is that you really just need to sell tickets to your shows. So a tour is composed of shows, and there's no way that you're ever going to have a successful tour unless you first understand how to execute a successful show. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't understand how to do this because they don't think enough in terms of numbers in math. Artists are kind of very well known for not really thinking in terms of exact numbers, but in the end, your budget and the capacity of the venue and how many people show up. I mean, these are exact figures that you really have to pay attention to, and they are going to affect your bottom line. They're going to impact your life. They have meaning, so it's really critical to get it. So, okay, let's just take a look here. We're going to use just some basic marketing language to understand how we have to approach this problem in order to successfully do a show. And then once you understand the show part of it, then you can apply it to the tour. So, so the first category is you just have people, right, that are somewhere in the geographic area that you're doing this show in. These people may or may not have heard of you, but in this particular category, we're talking about people who are not fans, right? So they might have heard of you, but they haven't heard your music, they haven't played your music, they haven't bought anything. They're basically might come to your show, but they're probably not going to come if they never figure out that you exist or whatever. So we're talking about just regular people who don't know you, right? And then we've got your fans, and these are people who not only have heard of you, but they've heard your music, and they like your music. They may have never come to a show before, may have never bought anything from you, but they like your music, they're jamming it, they're into it, and they're likely to come to a show if there's one that's close enough for them that they can do it without a big cost. I mean, some fans will drive halfway across the country to see people that they really love. But then past here, you also have to look at, this is a word that sometimes musicians don't really think about or don't like to think about as much, but customers. These are people who have actually bought your music or bought a ticket to the show and are not just into your stuff and like you, but they're willing to spend money to see you perform or to get merchandise or whatever. So the thing about this is okay, you need to know the numbers in each area that you're working in of all three of these categories. And if you're not keeping track of this stuff, you actually have no data with which you can successfully plan a tour and work with, a promoter to make sure that people show up. Now, it could be that, you've got a promoter that's got a whole bunch of other people that are on the lineup for the show, and they're not really concerned about you drawing people. But if you're going to be the headliner and you're going to be the main attraction, then this stuff actually starts to really, really matter. And if you neglect it, you're never going to succeed in the music industry. So you're going to want to keep track of this stuff if you want to be in control. So it's critical that there's enough people to draw from just to begin with that you can actually have the show that's the size that you want. Obviously, let's say you have a small show, right? That's only going to be 50 tickets are available for this. Well, in that particular scenario, I would say that in order to get, 50 tickets sold, you're probably going to need to work in an area that's got a minimum of, I would say, 100 times just the number of people as the number of tickets that you need to sell. So, if you're, let's say that you're doing it like a small town show, you probably need at least 5,000 people in a small town to work with if you're going to run ads to them and try to get these people aware that you exist and that get them to hear your music and all that stuff. So that's one thing I would recommend, is that don't do shows in areas that have less than that number of people to start with, because it's just very, very, very difficult to target people and get them to be aware of what's going on when you have less than that many people in the whole area to start with. I would say within probably like a 30-mile radius of where the venue is. So, this is not a hard and fast rule, but it is generally true that you want to work with. It's a lot easier to get people to show up for a show when you're working in a big metropolitan area, because you've got a much higher population density and word tends to travel faster in these places, and also you tend to have more people that are into like very specific types of music, and those people tend to be very closely knit and they talk a lot. So once word gets out about your show, it's like, the community will help. If they like you, they're gonna talk about you, and so it won't just be the people you reach directly, but there'll be some word of mouth working in your favor as well. So then you've got your fans, right? So in this little town or whatever that maybe has 5,000 people, like I would say that if you cut down, you don't have to get like a ton, but in order to get people to show up at the show and actually buy a ticket or pay the door charge, I would say that, you need at least twice as many fans in that area as you want people to show up. So I would just assume that no more than half of your fans in an area are actually going to show up to the show that is happening. So if you needed to get 50 customers, which are ticket sales to the show, I would say you would need a minimum of 100 fans. And the thing here that's critical to understand about these fans is that these are people that either you or the venue can communicate directly with. And, sometimes there are more fans out there than people that you can communicate directly with. Like, you don't necessarily have contact information for all of your fans that are in an area, but you're really not going to be able to control the attendance of your tour unless you have the contact information of your fans in that area. If you do, then it's much easier to promote the show and get people to show up, because you can get right in front of them in a direct message. So these are kind of just the numbers, that I would say you would need to work with at minimum in order to have a show that feels like, something serious is going on. I personally don't think that I would take a booking that, where a show had less than 50 tickets available, because it just sort of, the economics don't really work in that case, at least in most cases. So we start out with that. And if you're an artist that has never been on a tour and you've just been performing at festival type lineups where the main attraction is just that you've got all these people, all these artists, all these DJs or musicians or whatever, and they're all really small and none of them really are that good at marketing, and so the promoters just their strategy is to just draw people because they're just trying to get as many possible acts on this lineup as they can. That's the kind of situation where you're probably not going to get paid much and you can't really make a career or a living playing those types of events. Now, not to say that you can't make good money when you're booked at a music festival, but you have to have some draw and some following if you're going to expect to be paid any real money, right? Okay, so how do we get there? And we want to look at the strategy to get there carefully, because if you're just starting out and you haven't done this before, it's important to understand what the steps are. So the first step that you need to make if you've decided that you want to be a touring artist, like, you need to pick a city. So, you could pick your home city if you wanted to, or you could pick a city that's out of state, but you need to make a firm decision on where you're going to grow your fan base next. If you already have a solid local following and you've got a bunch of emails in your hometown, and you can already reliably get people to show up to your shows when you perform locally, then you probably don't need to do this in your hometown. You would probably want to pick a different city than where you live if you've already got this accomplished. But if you haven't gotten this accomplished, then it's probably best to pick the city where you live, because you're going to be able to do more shows. And the reality is, until you've got the ability to sell out your shows in your local area reliably, and promoters are confident that when they book you, people are going to show up, like, until you're there, you probably shouldn't be planning a tour. You need to learn how to do this right in one city first before you start doing it in like 10 cities in a row. So once you've picked your city, then what you need to do is you need to get some music available for download. And this is in exchange for an email address. So why are we doing it this way? Why do we need to get an email address in exchange for the music? Because if we don't have an email address, we have no way to communicate with these people. I mean, unless we're going to call them. I mean, whether you have an email address or a phone number, the reality is, like, okay, maybe they're in your social media, and you could do that. Like, you could filter your friends and make different friend lists on Facebook or something, and then you could just message all these people. But it's a lot of work to send out a ton of little individual messages, and it's much more efficient if we can use an email program where we just write one email and we send it out to the whole list, and we can then let them know that we're doing a show or whatever, right? We need to be able to communicate with our customers and with our fans. It's very, very important. And I would say that unless you actually have some type of contact information, you can't really consider somebody to be a fan, and definitely not a customer. So once you have this set up, and you're going to want to make a landing page, and there's some tech stuff involved with this because you got to set this up right. You could set up a download on Bandcamp, for example. But the problem is that how are you going to segment your list? How are you going to know that people who gave you their email at one point, that those people live in Denver as opposed to Los Angeles? So this is like the tricky part, where a lot of people sort of fail in their strategy because they don't understand that you actually have to make sure that your lists are segmented geographically if you're going to use this type of strategy to make a tour successful. So what you then need to do is you need to make a landing page. So you've got your music uploaded, and you're going to exchange it for an email address. You're going to do this with the landing page. And the key thing to understand here is this landing page needs to be different for each city. The landing page content itself could be almost identical. In fact, it very well might be the exact same content on the page, but the difference is that when the email is entered into the landing page to get the music, that they are added to a list that's specific and segmented to what you're doing with the next part of this, which is you want to run an ad offering free music only to people in, I would say, a 30-mile radius of that city. Okay, so what's happening here is we are building specific lists with landing pages and ads that are targeted at a specific area. And the whole reason that we want to do this is obviously we want to build up our fan base in these areas, but we also want to know exactly how many people we can communicate with and tell about a show or whatever else we're doing in that area. You know, it's going to be a little more expensive to restrict this ad to a geographic area. It could end up costing, you know, double what it would normally cost to do that if you were just targeting the entire US or a much bigger, you know, especially like worldwide. But the benefit of this, the sort of ancillary benefit, is when you have these emails, you can also push out your releases, and anytime you put out new music, you know, these people also might buy your music, buy your merch, etc. So in the long run, this is a really good strategy. If you don't have a lot of money to spend on ads, it could take a long time to build up enough people in each area that you could then do a show. But once you're there, it's like you don't have to pay every time you use an email address. So that's a permanent asset that can never be taken away. So that's the overall steps of the strategy that you would want to do for each of the cities that you want to tour in, right? And the important thing to understand here is, like, if you're new to this, you're doing this before you have any shows booked, before you have any tour dates booked, anything like that, because this is the foundation of your entire strategy for marketing, not only your shows, but it's going to help you market anything else that you want to sell. You know, even if you have like lessons or courses, or maybe you sell instruments or something like that. I mean, you could take this wherever you want to go with it. But without the ability to communicate with these people who like your music, there's no way you're going to have any chance of getting them to come to the show unless somebody else does it for you. So, okay, so let's look at the numbers there and look at kind of what you might expect to have to invest in order to get this to work in a city. So I found that I can typically get email addresses that are restricted to a geographic area for anywhere between like 50 cents and $2. Okay? So now this is the net cost. It may not be the gross cost. And the difference there is that, you know, you're going to want to try to sell your customers something, you know, whether it's a ticket or like a download or a CD or a t-shirt or something, as soon as you have their email address. And once you have their email address, of course, you can email them over and over and over again. But if you don't have something to try to sell them right away, as soon as they give you their email address, then your chance of making anything back to pay for your ads is very low. If you can sell them something straight away, and obviously not everyone's going to buy it, but for those who do, you're able to then sort of liquidate your ad spend and cut down your costs. So if we're working with this per email, when we're running our ads, then and let's say that 50% of the list buys tickets when the show comes. You know, I would say in some cases it's not going to even be that much. In some cases it's going to be 30%, 20%, even 10%. So the bigger the list you have, obviously the more security you have in being able to reliably sell these shows out. You want to keep growing these lists over and over and over again, especially if you're going to do this tour every year in the same cities, which I would recommend you keep working with the same places so that you can really build up your fan base in these areas. Then, if you have to, so if you need 50 ticket buyers, well, then you need at least 100 emails, more or less. Okay, so let's say that it's a worst case scenario where you're paying, $2 per email. So it's going to cost you, so the cost here is going to be $200 to get those 100 emails. And if we look at the ticket prices, most ticket prices tend to be between $10 and maybe in some cases as high as, like $35. It could even be higher than that. But let's just say for now we're just getting started, so tickets are $10 to our show. So if we can sell 50 tickets at $10 a piece, well, then that's going to equal a $500 gross. And if we're the promoter and we're actually doing the show ourselves and we're renting the venue, then we're probably going to have to pay the venue something. So it all depends on how this is working out. But I would say in most cases, if you're getting, $500 gross, you're probably going to be lucky to even just break even on that whole situation. You might make a little bit, but this is where, okay, once you have those 50 people though, right? Now, the key here to making the real money on the tours and to really succeeding is a little thing that we call merch, short for merchandise. So if you kind of run the numbers, and I've looked at this in various situations because I've run merchandise for professional tours for many years, we found that in an audience that is very well engaged, about 10% of attendees will buy. That's obviously just an estimate. It could be more, it could be less, but that's about the number that you want to look at and work with when it comes to this whole situation. So if you got 50 people at this show and 10% of them buy, so you're looking at 5 buyers. And if you have a range of stuff to sell, you don't necessarily need a lot of different things. I've done really well just selling flash drives of my catalog of music, and I've sold those for as much as $100 each. But you might have, you might have flash drives, and you might have t-shirts, and you might sell those for $25 each. And maybe you have some CDs, and you're selling those for, $15 a piece. Okay, and you could have all kinds of other stuff. You could have hoodies, whatever. Well, the important thing is that you want to have things at a few different price points because you're going to get more buyers overall if you have a range of things at different price points. So I've performed at shows where actually I didn't even get a performance fee, but I was able to sell 5 people at a show that only had about 50 attendees on a $100 flash drive, and so I made another $500 on merch. Okay, so I like flash drives because flash drives only cost a couple bucks a piece. Your profit margin on that is very, very high. And it's still a physical product. It's convenient. You can pack a ridiculous amount of music onto a flash drive, and people will buy it. Especially DJs will be really more than happy to buy a ton of music at a discounted price. If there's hundreds of tracks or dozens and dozens of hours of music on a flash drive, yeah, you're going to get sales in many cases, especially if the crowd is right. So you definitely need a merch situation if you're going to do well on tours. If you don't have it, it's likely that your margins are going to be very thin, even if you're being paid a lot for shows, because it's not just the expenses of the show itself. If you have a promoter that is doing the promotion, then it's like, okay, sure, you might be getting a lot for your show fee, but then what about all the rest of the travel? What about the hotels that you have to stay at between the gigs? Any touring artist will tell you it can be very, very expensive to sustain a tour because, you can't always just stay at friends' houses and stuff. Sometimes you do have to get hotel rooms, and you're eating out at almost every meal, if not every meal, so that adds up as well. So yeah, touring is very expensive to sustain. Without merch and without a really solid grasp of the numbers, it's very difficult to estimate what you're actually going to make from these shows. But if you know these numbers and you've got merch going, then your chances of actually being able to make a living are going to be double to triple somebody who doesn't, because you're going to be able to sustain your lifestyle at a much higher rate, because you're going to be getting the money in not just from those performance fees, but also from selling merch at the shows. And you're also going to be able to sell some of your stuff online. You can crowdfund for your albums and make thousands of dollars per album if you do it right, and you've got big email lists that you can blast out to. So, I just want to emphasize that if you're new to this, don't think that this is impossible. It can be hard. There are some challenges, but it's totally achievable to make a living doing music professionally. You just need to know your numbers. You have to be good at doing at least basic math, and you have to understand the importance of being able to communicate directly with the people who might buy your music down the road or come to a show, or who have already done that, and you just need to get them back. So that is what you need to do. That's how it works. So if you found that helpful, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that red button down there. And also check out my Beat Wizardry Facebook group. The link is below in the description, because in there I answer questions from producers all the time, and would be happy to help you with whatever you're struggling with in your production or whatever related to your music. So we'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much for watching.